Hi, it's Joe Roberts and Chief Winemaker of Esporão Wines, David Baverstock. Say hi, David.
Hi guys, nice to be here.
I think even though we're going to be talking about Portuguese wines tonight, specifically white wines of Portugal, and we're seeing that through the prism of some of these very interesting white wines from Esporão, which we're not drinking yet. We have some things to talk about before then. You're probably already drinking because we're a little bit late.
No, we had a couple.
Yeah, we had a couple beforehand waiting for the technical difficulties to get sorted out. So really excited to be here tonight in Pittsburgh, which is the spiritual home of my favorite NFL team. But more importantly, it's a stop on the U.S. tour of David Baverstock. So tonight we're going to walk through some very interesting things going on with Portuguese white wines, and we're going to use the wines of Esporão to do that just by means of a quick introduction of what's going on. We apologize for being a little bit late, a couple technical difficulties, but even though David and I don't sound Portuguese, in spirit we're Portuguese tonight, and you know, it's a little more laid back in Portugal, so we're starting things a couple of minutes later. The way the mechanics will work tonight, we're broadcasting through Ustream. Most of you folks are well familiar with it. Really, we want this to be interactive, so there's two ways you can get in touch with us. Otherwise, it's just going to be David and I talking heads here and occasionally sipping. So we want to know what you're thinking about the wines, questions you've got for David, just general thoughts on Portuguese wines. We want to hear it all. So two ways to get in touch with us. On Ustream, there's a chat function. It should be on your right-hand side. You can use that. We've got folks standing by who will monitor that, and they'll let David and I know those questions, and we'll answer as best we can. And also on Twitter, you can hit us up at Esporão Wines. So at Esporão Wines on Twitter, and we'll also be monitoring that. And I think we're ready to get rolling. So first, let's just do a quick introduction. My name's Joe Roberts. I'm just going to MC, hopefully talk just enough to get David really moving and talking to you all about the wines, and then I'll shut up. And you know me from onewinedude.com and playboy.com as well, with the wine column there. And this is David Baverstock. As soon as he starts talking, you're going to know that he's not Portuguese.
Okay, so that's for me to start. Yeah, I'm an Australian trained winemaker. I was born and grew up in Australia, and studied winemaking back in the 70s, and then through a lot of good luck and whatever, I managed to find myself in Portugal. I married a Portuguese girl and I really made my career in Portugal. Although I did a few years in Australia as a winemaker. I'm from actually from the Barossa Valley originally. But these days, having been a number of years with the Symingtons making fortifieds up in the north, I'm now in the Alentejo with Esporão, and here to talk to you today about these some of the white wines that we're making.
And this is your 20 what vintage?
20s. No, it was my 21st vintage with Esporão, but I've actually lived in Portugal for 30 years. So and I have Portuguese nationality as well. So I'm qualified, I guess.
any roots for Portuguese soccer teams? So
and
that's the real test.
FC Porto. Yeah, that's the only team. The only team.
I know a few people in Portugal who might disagree with that, but okay. So I think in the interest of making up for a little bit of lost time or technical difficulties, we're going to move on. A couple things before we get to the wines, before you and I can start drinking. There's a couple things we want to talk about. One of those topics is what where white winemaking fits in Portugal. So a lot of people out there, and just generally in the wine world, and we've got I know a couple of names I saw on Twitter before we started. We've got some very knowledgeable people out there. But even folks like that, we're thinking about Portugal, and we're thinking about port. Mm-hmm. We're thinking about probably red wines from the Douro, right?
Yeah.
Where we're getting into whites, I mean, we're thinking about probably, and you got this map back here, which I know is probably a little bit difficult for you to read there at home, but generally speaking, a relatively small country, but a lot of geographic diversity.
Yeah.
You know, climate's much wetter, cooler in the north, and then as you go inland from the sea towards Spain, you're going to get a much warmer climate. But when we're thinking white wines of Portugal, we're thinking mostly up here in Vinho Verde, and that's, you got a really quick hit type wine, as I like to call them. Yeah. A lot of them are spritzy. There's some that are have a little more gravitas, but mostly very spritzy whites, very refreshing whites. Yeah. And we've got very, very different wines lined up than that. So I was hoping you can just tell us some of your thoughts around where white wines fit, especially these types of white wines, in the general scheme of Portuguese winemaking?
Yeah, well, it's like you say, people that know anything about Portuguese wines, it's always about the ports, and more recently the red table wines. And we always talk up the fact that Portugal's got all these fantastic grape varieties, 250 indigenous grape varieties, and we've always pretty much focused on the reds, the Touriga Nacionals and things like that. And sort of white wines have always been a bit underrated. And it's not that hard to work out why. I mean, red wines outsell white wines, especially in Portugal, by like 3 to 1.
Wow.
So white wines got a little bit left behind. And when winemaking improved in Portugal in the 80s, when a lot of money came into the country, when they joined the European community, most of that went into winemaking and and viticulture, and so as a backup to that. White winemaking, which is more difficult than reds in a lot of ways. You can make good red wines in wineries that aren't that well equipped. Okay,
refrigeration, electricity,
and
temperature
hygiene.
control,
Winemakers have to know a bit more about what they're doing, I think, to consistently make good high quality white wines. And so I think that there's been a learning period over the last 20 years that there are some really good white varieties also, and they're probably up there with the level of the reds when they get the proper chance to show themselves. So they're catching up. I mean, red wines are always going to always probably have the edge in terms of focus and salability, but the whites can be equally good. There's some fantastic varieties. I mean, you mentioned the Vinho Verde, but within the Vinho Verde there's Alvarinho, which is a spectacular wine in its own right, and then these in particular are from the Alentejo, which is it's a warmer to hot region, but the local varieties are well adapted, and we make some pretty interesting stuff.
And it's interesting you mentioned Alentejo. We'll get into that a bit more in terms of history of Esporão in a minute, but we think of Alentejo as it's a very warm region, and so you naturally think of red wines there. You don't think of whites necessarily as thriving in that climate. And we were talking earlier about acidifying wines. Is that something that you need to get into in Alentejo, particularly with the white wines?
Well, whites and reds. I mean, it's part of the course in a region that's like I mean, I'm from the Barossa Valley. Alentejo is probably a little bit hotter than the Barossa, more like say Mudgee in Australia, perhaps. Yeah, I mean, we don't overdo it, and we're pretty careful about how we add it and when we add it. And that sort of thing, and with obviously concern about climate change, so it's not something that's going to go away. So what we've been doing over the last few years is looking at varieties that can perhaps handle the heat better than some of the local varieties. So we've brought in other varieties from other parts of Portugal and things like that. So, and we'll get to taste the Verdelho particularly in a moment. So that should
not quickly enough, right?
That'll all make sense then.
So we've talked about how the modern stuff, I guess you call modern style winemaking, stainless steel, refrigeration, temperature control, so that's contributing essentially to the development of better quality wines.
And understanding the grape varieties, as well in the vineyard, and working yields and modern viticulture in the vineyards as well. And picking these varieties when they should be picked, so they can show their varietal character, and then whether you leave them as varieties or blend them, but the overall product is going to be better if you apply all the sort of modern winemaking, not just hygiene and cleanliness and things like that, but letting the varieties express themselves in the winery and getting them at the right maturity in the vineyard as well.
And in that vein, while we talk very quickly an overview of these wines, you can see behind us, why these 3 wines? So we just talked about blending, but the first one is actually not a blend.
We have Esporão has a big, a wide range of wines, and these 3, I think they epitomise what we're doing. We're experimenting with some varietal individual grapes and making varietal wines, more on the red side than whites, but we're doing a Verdelho. We've done one for about the first vineyard was in 2004. So the vines were planted in the late 90s, so they're quite mature now. So Verdelho is an example of an individual grape variety, but historically, as I think most people know, Portugal is famous for blending. Its top wines are always blended from 3 or 4 or 5 or even more grapes, So the other two wines that we're going to taste, one is a Montverdi, which is a much bigger blend, so it shows what the Alentejo can do at a good price point level with blending different varieties. And the other is our Esporão Reserve White, which is based on 3 local grape varieties, and it's partially barrel fermented, so it's a little more sophisticated in that way. So it gives a good cross section of what we do as winemakers at Esporão.
And we'll get into it, but the order, by the way, I know I'm always chopping at these events. So what order? So the order is going to be the W. That's going to be the first. And I don't know if you can see that label, pretty clean stylistically there.
There's a lot of actually a lot of. I mean, the V's obviously for Verdelho. There's a lot of information which you won't get on this transmission, but if you're prepared,
electron microscope.
Yeah. Our marketing people love to say. I always criticise the way that they make the lettering so small, and they say, well, if you want to get the information, you'll find a way to get there. So.
If you've got a pair of binoculars, and then Monteverde will be the second, the 2011.
These are both 2011s. Actually, they're all 2011.
And then the last one, the Reserva, 2011, which you'll see is a pretty awesome label, and we'll get into that, discuss the label a bit more when we taste the wine. It's probably a good time to talk about a little bit of the history of Esporão. I know we're keeping everybody from they're already drinking at home. Believe me, I want to bust into this Verdelho because I've had this before and it's absolutely banging. So I'm really excited to taste it again. We could talk for 4 hours probably about the history of Esporão. We're not going to do that. Obviously, we've got the better part of an hour, but I myself have been there. There is way more material about Esporão than we could possibly cover here today. Some quick examples. The boundaries of the property, they predate the actual demarcation of the Douro as a port producing regions. They were demarcated in the 1200s. There is an olive tree on the property. You make olive oil as well. That thing must have been planted during the Crusades. It's enormous. The trunk would encompass the two of us easily inside of it. There's an iconic tower that adorns the labels. You can see it, a bit of it right there on that label, and that was built in the 1400s. Now houses artwork from your Reserva labels.
True.
And you've got archaeological dig artifacts there that predate everything that we're talking about.
Yeah, every time we plant a new vineyard, we dig out these old Roman artifacts and old pottery things that go back to Roman times and indicate that wine was grown back there in the biblical whatever.
Well, it's a pretty amazing spot. So all I can say is encourage everybody to go to Notes for Esporão, and we've written about a lot of those things on there. Check that out. It's much more than we could cover in detail here. There's a ton of detail behind each of those things. Now, let's fast forward through all that. Talk about the modern history of Esporão so people can get, I guess, a better context of some of the wines as we taste them. You've got 2 main properties, essentially. Why don't you walk us through each of those?
Okay, well, we're going to taste Alentejo wines today because that's how Esporão got started. The first wines at Esporão were made in the late 80s. The winery was built in 1986.
Which is incidentally after the family came back from the revolution and reacquired the property, which, again, go to notesforesporão.com and read about that. That's like a spy novel in and of itself.
Yeah, so the original vineyards were planted in the early 70s, and then the revolution came along and that was more than a slight technical hitch that threw them out for about 10 years or so. And so the owners had to flee to Brazil, came back, but then there was already a flourishing vineyard, about 200 hectares of quite well-established vineyard. So that enabled them to build a winery in 1986. So the first wines came out on the market in the late 80s, and Esporão Reserve was created about that time, so it's been on the market for 25 years or so, and Montverdi has been a more sort of recent sort of acquisition. But we became very strong in Alentejo we were one of the first producers in a region that really didn't have that much going for it at the time. There were a few producers down there, and now there are heaps, and it's now it's actually in Portugal it's the premium wine producing. Considered the premium wine producing in terms of bottle sales of wine.
Fastest growing.
Fastest growing. Yeah, it's the biggest area in Portugal now, and it's one the consumers have most confidence in. So when we've been there for sort of 25 years, so we've got off to a very big head start, and we're the biggest wine producer in the Alentejo and second or third in Portugal, behind Sograt perhaps. But anyway, we in sort of the late 2000 decade, we kind of felt that we established ourselves. We were very successful in Alentejo. More and more the Douro wines were gaining notoriety, and certainly wine journalists and wine opinion makers have a thing about the Douro wines.
Oh, we're geeky. We're geeky about
I wasn't necessarily referring to you guys, but there's certainly an element.
We're going to own up. I know there's people out there raising their hands.
There's an element of that.
Guilty.
And I understand it. I mean, they're outstanding wines, and so we felt we should have a Douro property in our portfolio. So we looked around for a year or so, and eventually hit upon Quinta dos Mouriças, which is sort of, if you know the Douro Valley, it's between Régua and Pinhal, so it's in the Cima Corrigal, but it's in a cooler part of that in that region. It's actually between Velado and Crasto, if you're looking at sort of names to identify.
Stunning spot, by the way.
Beautiful.
Stunning spot.
And it kind of hit all the right, it had the right criteria for what we're looking for. It had about 60 hectares of producing vineyard. It had the sort of famous vinhas velhas, the old vines, which everybody wants in the Douro, to make the reserves, the top end wines. And it had a winery that we could knock into shape fairly quickly and sort of hit the ground running with some good red wines. And it had some stocks of old port, so we actually able to release a 10-year-old Tawny right from the word go. So the
selling point. Yeah, I want to buy a house that has a stock of old port.
But so we're very well off now. We have a premium operation in the Alentejo and a new developing project in the Douro, which is going well.
Excellent, and you have possibly one of the best cooks, home cooked meals there. I think, and Anna Maria. This is a person that works at Quinta dos Mouriças, and the grilled octopus that this lady makes is about the best thing I think I've ever eaten.
She makes very good home cooking. The best you can get.
It's fantastic. So I think it's probably time to start getting into some of these wines. I mean, we've been chatting for the better part of half an hour here. Why don't we get started? We're gonna, as we mentioned, we're gonna taste the Verdelho first.
Okay.
All right, he's gonna pour for me. I like this guy.
I'm very versatile. Winemaker.
So, in a way, we're going in a reverse order now through the way these wines were established with Esporão, right? So you made your name with Reserva and and it's a bit of an anomaly in Portuguese winemaking because you got a varietal bottling, one variety of day that's not the same as Verdelho. So
well,
talk a little bit about this grape.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you a bit more. Really, I mean, obviously it's a Spanish white grape, famous in Rueda, but from what we can find out so far, and I haven't seen a scientific study to actually show that it's not the same as Verdelho, but just in tasting the wines, to me they're different. Okay, so I think there's a little bit more tropicality in this grape that we have in the Alentejo. So I think at this stage the jury's out still, but it seems that it's not the same as Verdelho. But on the other hand, they're two Iberian white varieties, almost sounding the same. Perhaps maybe they started out the same, and then somehow, with clonal differences over the centuries, Verdelho in Portugal is not the same as Verdelho. Anyway.
I think before we jump into this one, which is banging, I love the smell of this. I think we had a question about white wines. We're just talking about the Douro Valley and establishing Quinta dos Mouriças.
Okay.
White wines coming out of the Douro. Is there anything you can tell us about that? Is this Brau looking into that?
Yeah, we'd love to have a white wine ourselves, but we don't have any white grapes on the property, and we're not really that comfortable yet with buying grapes and doing. So we want to establish the red wine project first, but we want to get into whites. For sure, it's a question of getting to know. Well, either eventually we'd like to plant our own grapes, but that's we're talking sort of 5 or 6 years down the track. So we need to come up with some pretty good partners in the Douro and find some really good quality, high quality white grapes.
So stay tuned is the answer.
Yeah, but in general, I mean, the Douro again produces. I think in most regions of Portugal, the white wine styles mirror a bit the red wines. Okay, so the white wines in Esporão and Alentejo are a little bit similar to the reds in the way that they're full-bodied and whatever. And the Dow whites are spicy and elegant like the reds. And the Douro, they're well-structured white wines. They're quite complex. Okay, in a way, you know, you can say that about the reds as well. But typically in the Douro, because a lot of the vineyards in the Douro have been the varieties get planted all together. So these old vines are mixed, are like field blends. There's a lot of that with the whites up there. So people don't really know that much about you know doing individual grape varieties, but they're very complex and they're sort of in their own right in Portugal. They've got their own cult wine status. You know, wines like Guru,
right,
particularly, and a few others. I mean, and Rodomas from Nearport. I mean, they're very complex. Some of them are using good wood barrel maturation and fermentation, stuff like that. So there's some really good white wines coming out the Douro, but they're on a much smaller scale than the reds. There's not a lot of there were never a lot of white grapes planted in the Douro from the word go, because typically the best red wines are made from the same grapes that were planted to make port, and there were never very many white grapes planted to make white port. I mean, white port is a curiosity thing. You don't see a lot of white port either. So the white wines are some of these really outstanding white wines come from very old white grape vineyards.
No one's going to say that.
But they're worth checking out for sure.
Right. So coming back to Alentejo, now this interesting wine jumps out of the glass. I mean, for me, I love the passion fruit action on this, almost like the Sauvignon Blanc, but definitely has more weight, gravitas, and citrus to it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like you can smell this thing from like 10 paces.
Yeah. And the other thing, it's very hard to tell against this awful coloured carpet floor, but it's very hard to get a good handle on the colour. But it's got a lovely straw greeny kind of green straw with green hinge touches, which is it's always a good sign. I mean, I don't like really pale, stripped out looking white wines, because then that follows through on the palate. And with here, you get all those lovely aromatics, but there's also some texture on the palate, which I like particularly. And
is that a function of just the grape?
It's a function of the grape and the way we work it in the winery. We give it some skin contact to enhance the aromatics, and we leave it on the lees for about 3 months.
A little cream,
a little bit of textural stuff.
Tiny bit. And this is a grape that you guys really first established in the region. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, Verdelho typically, it's from the island of Madeira, where it makes the classic fortified wine, but it exists in the Douro. But again, it's all sort of mixed together with other varieties. It exists as a varietal in the Dow. That's one place it does exist, but in the Alentejo it didn't. And I can put my hand up and say, as an Australian, that I knew it made good wine in Australia in the same sort of climatic conditions in the heat. So it would work in the Alentejo, so I planted it in the late 90s and hoping for this kind of result.
I'm going to be drinking this at dinner, by the way. And we want to hear what you guys are thinking about this wine.
Because it's interesting, because it's at the same time, like you're saying, it's tropical, but then it becomes limey, and then it becomes grapefruity, and it's got all this kind of lovely nuances.
Yeah. There's a nice line that runs through it. So you said it's one of those grapes that you can tell holds up well in the heat. You get that body, but it's definitely got a little bit of zing. And I know we've had this before, specifically at events in New York, where this pairing with food, this thing was really versatile. I think that it had the room jumping, because this is just a wine that absolutely is banging right out of the glass. Easy one to make friends with.
Yeah. 2011 was a good year, a cool year. So this the fruit intensity and the freshness and the crispness is all there. Obviously helped by a slightly cooler year, but it's got the intensity and the minerality too. It's got all those kind of things going for it. Obviously no time in oak. It's just it was bottled relatively early to maintain the freshness.
Any thoughts out there? Bring them on. Bring them on.
Uh-oh.
or questions while we're on this wine. Otherwise, you're going to watch me drink it as it gets a little more tropical and a little more minerally in the glass. What were the reactions? Since you don't see a lot of varietal bottlings, so I've seen single variety Touriga Nacional, for example, out of Portugal. In fact, you guys were involved, I know, a couple years ago at an event where we saw competition with that grape, but you don't see that in whites. I mean, what was the driver?
Just going to say, somebody out there's got very good taste.
David Falchak loves it. So what was the driver behind doing a single variety?
I think the single varietal thing happened with the reds and the whites. As kind of Portugal came of age as a wine producer, you know, became more confident about its ability to make really good wines, consistently good wines. It came to understand its varieties better, and as we started pushing these varieties, Portuguese wines in general in the 90s. I mean, I started doing this again, you know, with Esporão more on the side of the reds, to get. I remember at Esporão we had some Cabernet, and we made a range of varietals from Trincadeira to Aragonese to Touriga Nacional, Alicante Boucher, and we had a Cabernet. And I thought the Cabernet would be important to get us into the English kind of supermarkets. And they tasted the range and said, well, get rid of the Cabernet. You know, we don't want that. You know, we want authentic Portuguese varietals. And so it became a bit of a cult thing in Portugal to do individual grape varieties, even though we like to talk up the and we're better, and all our top wines are made from blends. I think there was a phase, and it's still ongoing, but not as important as it was, to make individual grape varietal wines to show the potential of these varieties that nobody really heard about before. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's yeah. I mean, I don't think it's as important now to be doing them, but it was for a while to get the message, because we keep talking about how good the varieties are and how many there are. I mean, we're not going to make 200 or something, but I mean, at Esporão we often have half a dozen, 4 or 5 reds and a couple of whites.
And you're not making a lot.
The reds we only do 5,000 litres or 6,500 bottles, but this we do about 20,000 bottles of the Verdelho. So we're doing reasonable volumes, and we can push it up. We've actually got our own.
They have a chance. People have a chance of getting this again, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's nice. It's nice when you come all the way from there to a place like Pittsburgh, and you crack a bottle in a room like this in a transmission, and it tastes as good as it does back home.
Yeah. Speaking of Pittsburgh, I did not bring a terrible towel. I know there's probably bets being taken on that. They found the event was here. I did not bring it. Okay, I should have. I didn't. Richard Offrey wants seafood. Richard, when do you not want seafood? Mm-hmm. You always want seafood. I know Richard was a guy. I think Richard and I actually shared seafood at an event in New York with this wine. Yep. I think at one point. Yeah.
It's crying out for it.
Yeah, it really is. I think
some shellfish.
And as it warms up and the body comes out,
yep.
Yeah, you want crab, you want lobster, something like that. Yep. Fantastic. In terms of time, we should probably move on to the next wine. Yeah. You grab that. The Maltavey. Now, for those of you playing along at home, and if you are trying to get your Wine Century Club membership, I think we're going to give you like 9 or 10 varieties that you can write in and check off tonight. Okay, but the art of this wine really is the blend. I mean, this is a label that I don't know if it's one that is particularly very well known in the U.S. At least for a lot of consumers. In Brazil, this is a wine that everybody would know. I mean, this is a wine that's like got a big market in Portugal.
Big following in Portugal, Brazil.
Yeah. And completely different. Now here with the Verdelho, we're talking about a single expression, single vintage, and really bringing out the what's dynamic and unique and interesting about it and for both of those conditions. Maltavey is much more about providing a consistent, I call it like comfort wine. Like it's the type of wine I want with comfort food, and you know what you're getting every time you grab the bottle. And this is the art of the blend, because there's 3 varieties in here that don't roll off everybody's tongue.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, I'm not. Antavash. I can get close. Rupiero and
Purum. Purum, they're the 3 main ones. Okay, there's bits and pieces of other ones in it, because it's quite a big blend, and we do close to 1 million litres of this. The beauty of it is the consistency, as you say, and you know, it's a hard act to follow to put this on after the Redetti,
Yeah.
to be honest. But it's there's enough sort of floral aromatics, I think, to make it interesting. And then there's a lovely richness on the palate that I think is makes it very appealing and very, you know, commercial is not the best word to use, but it's a great value for money wine, that's for sure. Doesn't see any oak. It's bottled quite early, but
it has a lot of richness for not seeing any wood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Just got a question about food pairing. I was just thinking in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, I would even do mac and cheese with this thing, and I'm not a big mac and cheese guy. What would be traditionally Portuguese to throw with this kind of wine?
Yeah, I mean, Portuguese are big on seafood, so they'd find some kind of, if you chill it a bit more, it'll go with the seafood. If you like you say, if let it warm up a bit, maybe more kind of baked fish, that kind of thing. You could have chicken. It'd be fine with white meat, I think. You know, chicken.
Yeah, that's
some
cool.
chicken dishes.
A little bit of cream, or I get a toasted nut quality out of this wine, which, again, the toastiness for me is pretty interesting considering that there isn't any wood. And is there a particular grape of the three that you think really gives that sense of almost like a
slightly fatness?
No, it's like almost like a slightly toasted nut quality. I'd be interested in what gives it the body too.
Yeah, more the Anton for body. We talk about Reparo more for the floral aromatics, so that only leaves Perum, so that'll maybe it's that one. And I think there's a question about the Redetti pairing, because it's a little more intense in shellfish for sure, oysters and stuff like that. You know, shellfish generally. I think Americans are better at hitting on these kind of pairings than we are. I mean, because we
you think so?
Yeah, because we're kind of more localized with the kind of dishes that we have, and so.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. It's true. One thing that struck me going through Portugal when I visited a couple times was that you could be in one area near Porto, and you would. This is a traditional dish. With we typically pair it with this wine. It's made this way, and just a few kilometers inland and south, you get a completely different set. I mean, there's different music that's popular. There's culturally big differences, and then the cuisine becomes very, very different. And you're talking like if driving the distance from here in Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, and having almost a completely different sense. And look, Primanti Brothers and cheesesteaks are not that far apart. Do you know what I mean? But the differences are much greater in Portugal.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the oldest country in Europe. Or the boundaries of the country are, I mean, much older than Spain and France and Germany. So I guess they had a lot of time to sort it all out.
Or entrench themselves.
Yeah.
And go for those differences. Any other reactions out there? Chime them in, people. I like the fact that a wine in this price range is something that can deliver, and is something that you know what you're getting every time you pick it up. I think we're getting a signal to hit the next wine, which I'm not going to complain because it's a really good one. So we're on to the 11 Reserva. This is the most recent release. This does see time in wood. And it's one of the wines that put Esporão on the map.
Yep.
We mentioned we want to talk a little bit about that label. In this case, I believe it's a photograph this year, right? But basically, artwork is commissioned every year for each vintage.
A leading Portuguese artist at the time who doesn't mind doing the job for us and being paid in wine, basically.
And then you house the results. In the tower.
And we keep the originals in the tower, and then also in the restaurant, the new restaurant complex. We have a lot of them on the wall. So that's it's a fun thing to maintain that link between wine and the arts, and it's always a new event. Particularly in Portugal, people like to keep up with what we're doing on the label and the art scene. It's more difficult, I guess, on the export market, but it's
it gives
nice
some idea. I think what's also cool about it is it gives some focus to an artist, because they're local. You guys are homers. You're picking a Portuguese artist, and then that's going out to a bunch of different markets globally, and then they're getting some exposure to that, which I think is pretty cool, because that would not be on my radar even as somebody who followed art, necessarily.
No, it's good fun. I mean, it gives us a chance to play around with the capsule. The capsule has to match every year. We it's good. It's good fun for the marketing department.
So walk us through this wine. I mean, you're going to get now a completely different aromatic scent.
We're maintaining the theme of blending. You know, we did the Verdelho in varietal, Montvelho blending, but on a large scale. This is blending on a higher premium scale. I suppose we do more than most people would think of this because it's a reserve wine, but we do up to 100,000 litres of this, so it's on a reasonably large scale. But it's the typical three Alentejo varieties: the Ribeiro, Arinto this time, and Anton Vaz again. So Arinto for the acidity more, Anton Vaz for the body, and Ribeiro for some floral stuff. There's a little bit of Semillon in this as well.
Oh,
because we have Semillon as a variety for another one of our white wines, and some of it now we've got 5-10%. There's some citric stuff there as well, which I think the Semillon helps with. But only 40% of this wine is barrel fermented and spends 6 months in barrel, and the other 60% I do in tank, and then I leave the wines for 6 months on the lees, so both in barrel and in tank. And when I put the blend together, it's to get a balance between the oaky component, the textural things you get from leaving the wine on the lees, and the fruit from the tank stuff. So I think the oak. I mean, the trick is to have the oak contributing to the complexity of the wine, but not clobbering it. Not clobbering.
Yeah,
and I think
get spice and a little bit of roundness. But for me, the calling card, this is rich. I mean, it's a rich wine, and this is a wine I've poured blind for Chardonnay people. Everybody knows they have somebody who's a Chardonnay person in their life, and I just want Chardonnay. I've actually poured this for a couple people who didn't. They just drank it, thought it was Chard, and then come back later and wait, what? There's still a bit different. What is this? And then you can spring them on that. Of course, they can't pronounce the grape varieties, but not many of us can. Yeah.
But it's got a nice, elegant thread running through it, and it's got very good acidity on the finish, and that's what we want. I mean, all these wines. When you're talking about the whites today, but all the wines we make at Esporão and the reds as well, we want them to be good on the table. You know, good with food, good with gastronomy, the whole thing. You know, people can enjoy them, and it's meant to be, something that is contributing to the meal, to the table. And all these wines are pretty easy to match with food, and you can drink them on their own by the glass because there's not too much oak in this wine. Yeah. There's not too much tannin.
But a lot of complexity aromatically. You can kind of sit and think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that there are 3 traditional grape varieties.
Yeah.
From that region. But is this style traditional to Alentejo? Yeah, I mean, this is this, as I mentioned, it's you can fake somebody out who's a Chardonnay lover with this style of wine.
Yeah, when we bottle these wines, we have to put this. We get this seal on the back label, and that's the DOC seal that's issued by. Got it? Okay, that seal is issued by the local commission who control the quality of the wines that we can bottle, and if it doesn't, they taste it, and if it doesn't reach a certain point level, we can't call it a DOC. We can only call it a regional or something like that. And when I first started using barrels, when I went to Esporão, I think there'd been like 2 vintages before I got there, and they hadn't put the white in, but they were calling it a reserve, and between that and sort of Montvelho, there wasn't that much of a difference. So I started using a little bit of oak to at least bring it up to a certain level, and over the years we've obviously fine-tuned the way we do that. But the first comeback from the commission was that oak isn't using oak in white wines in the Alentejo isn't part of the traditional process, and these wines aren't going to be typical. But at least the Alentejo is a fairly new region, so they weren't this old kind of old-fashioned guys that were going to say
bend a little bit, yeah.
So they said, listen, just take it easy, which was pretty good. They said, just you can use oak, but so over the years it's all.
Well, that's good advice almost for anybody. So we just got a question. So, what is your favorite Portuguese grape, David? Maybe we should split it up. Maybe we should split up white and red. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give them a fighting chance here.
No, white I have no problem with it, and I suppose we have to share this a bit with Spain. But Alvarinho, I think Alvarinho is it just covers all the bases for what you want in a white wine. It's got freshness, but it's got complexity, and it's got minerality.
Versatile too. I mean, you can get those really simple spritzy versions. You can get versions that seem more serious and complex.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd have to go with Alvarinho. Yeah, that's, and the reds, it's a tough one. I suppose Touriga. I'm not. I mean, in the Alentejo we do really well with Alicante Boucher, and as a winemaker, I mean, maybe Alicante. I should say Alicante Boucher because we can always make a good. Every year we can make a great wine out of Alicante Boucher, whereas Touriga can be a little bit up and down.
Come on, props. How many times do you hear winemakers say their favorite red grape is Alicante Boucher?
Not very often. Or Touriga. No, but but then because it's originally it's French, but it's found its home in Portugal. I don't know whether I should be pushing Alicante as much as I am, but it does fantastic things in Alentejo. So otherwise, if of the Portuguese grape varieties, you'd have to go for Touriga Nacional because it's a great grape in the Douro for fortified wines. It's always part of the vintage port component, and it's proven itself as a varietal in the Douro, and we've made great wines from it in the Alentejo as well. So it performs across a wide range of climates.
Yeah, and then occasionally you get the single varietal bottlings of that really shine too.
Yeah. Very good.
Right. Any other questions from the global interwebs? Are you single? That was a question we're getting out there. We covered that. And I have a question. I know we're talking about whites. You literally finished 2012 harvest and flew out to the U.S. to tour. So no break for you, right? So maybe let's talk a little about the 2012 harvest and specifically on white, since that's our topic today. Kind of how's that looking and major differences from 2011.
Yeah. Well, it was a great year. We always say that. It was a great year.
Optimal ripeness, right?
No, it was a difficult year. We got less than half our average winter rainfall, so a lot of lack of water in the lack of groundwater, a lack of water. Most people in the Alentejo irrigate, but if their dams don't get full during the winter, they don't have water to irrigate with. So it's a bit. Esporão, as you know, is different because we have this huge man-made lake dam thing. I mean, it's huge.
Big.
So we had enough water to get through our season. But what it meant was that in the period where we don't irrigate so much between bud break and fruit set, there wasn't a lot of groundwater, and the berries are naturally quite small during this harvest, both for whites and reds. So for the reds particularly, the berries were small, yields were well down, but like on average in the Alentejo, 25–30% down. So red's fantastic, really intense, highly coloured, and the whites. I think the whites will be up there as well. They're pretty aromatic and pretty good, but maybe slightly better for styles like Esporão than maybe the Verdelho, because we're looking for a bit more concentration in the Esporão.
So
but
difficult vintage to navigate.
Yeah.
Inside of whites.
Yeah. When you get fruit stress, you're always getting problems with maturity.
So we just handed another question here. The question is, how have the styles of white wine evolved in Portugal, or maybe specifically Alentejo? I mean, we've touched a bit on that and some of the history, but do you see an evolution?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the fact that the Alentejo in itself is quite a new region, so there was never a typical style as such. I guess I suppose just the fact that we started using oak in our top wines has made them a little bit more sophisticated at the top end. But something like Monteverde would be typical of. We're making it the same now as we were back when I joined the company in the early '90s. I wouldn't say that style has evolved particularly. Maybe we've got a better fruit source now. People are planting better varieties, and some of the old-fashioned varieties that weren't so good are being replaced by these more Ripeiras and Orintas and maybe this Semillon.
It's a bit more focus.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the fruit quality is getting better because we have better source material, and we have a viticultural team that go out and know what they're doing in the vineyard and that kind of thing. So
that's in a way mirroring the technological evolution.
Yeah,
that's allowed the whites to.
But we're not doing anything that much different in the winery in terms of vinification. We're just doing straightforward fermentation and bottling early to keep the freshness there. So I wouldn't, it's something like on value. I suppose the other concept is the individual varietal bottlings, like with value. And we've done a Rupeiro before. We might do one this year. We've got a very good Rupeiro. And then things like Esporão, top end stuff, where I think we went through a phase when perhaps we were using a little bit too much oak, and we used to use more American oak. And now we've cut back on American, using more French, but overall using less. So the wine's more elegant and more complex. And I think that's happening, in other parts of Portugal as well.
We just got a really cool question about one for you in terms of your background.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they know me. They don't need to talk to me. You're more interesting anyway. You mentioned you had been working in fortifieds in your past, and a question came in: how is the work you've done with those fortifieds informed your table wine styles and the approach that you've got to those?
Yeah, I would never expected the question, but it's actually quite a good one, because there's not much in fortified winemaking that you can use in table winemaking, because with fortifieds, just when the ferments are getting interesting, you hit them with brandy spirit, everything stops, But what I did learn in fortifieds were, both for vintage ports and for tawny ports, was the art of blending and creating a house style, like Graham's 10-year-old, Taylor's 10-year-olds, and different companies' 10-year-olds. They're very much a house style. Right. And vintage ports, Nearport style, Fonseca style, Graham style, they're very much based on vineyards, or 2 or 3 vineyards that they put together. And I found, particularly the tawnies, when I was making 10-year-old, 20-year-olds for Graham's, Dow's, Wars, I was with the Symingtons. There's when you're looking for a balance, something that has balance and elegance, you find that when you're playing around with different aged wines to go in to make a particular, say, average 10-year-old tawny. And so I think when I'm blending table wines, say a Esporão Reserve Red or a Esporão White, and looking at different components from barrels and tanks, and trying to get the perfect product at the end of it, sometimes I kind of hark back to doing the same sort of thing with fortifieds. So just the correct answer is just in the blending side of it. I think there's a lot of discipline and rigor in coming up with the right blends for fortifieds. That in a funny kind of way you can use some of that.
That makes sense. Wait, another question: which wine will be a standout based on the 2012 harvest, and I guess specific to Esporão?
We've got some fantastic Aragonage. A varietal Aragonage. We've got some absolutely fantastic.
Interesting.
Because Aragonage is Tempranillo.
Yeah. If you don't know what it is and it sounds Spanish, then the answer is Tempranillo. That's why.
But no, we've got some. Tempranillo doesn't come along every year. We find it fluctuates a lot in quality. We had a fantastic 04, 07, and then since I think 07 we didn't do a sort of a varietal Tempranillo Aragonage. So we've got some really good stuff this year. Maybe the nights are a bit cooler. It loses acidity quite badly. It has a very high pH, and I think the nights are a bit cool this year. And we've also sourcing fruit from an area just north of in the Alentejo, but in the northern area called Porto Alegre, which has got higher altitude fruit, and we're incorporating some of that Aragonage into our stuff now, and it's just coming. It's going to be sensational, really good.
So just another question is about this sparkling. You guys produce sparkling wines as well, which is not something you associate with. I mean, I've had a few and some red sparklers, some Vino Verde, if you can believe it. Smaller producers.
Barra they do.
So maybe you could just quickly mention what you guys are doing with sparkling.
Yeah, it's a very small part of our portfolio, to be honest. I mean, I still can't really believe that we're making a decent sparkling.
Is it out of Alentejo?
It's all Alentejo, but the thing is
not the area you would associate.
No, because it's very hot, and we have to start really early and get everything sort of the whites when they're 10:30, 11, and so it means we've got to leave our beach holidays much earlier. So not very popular wine. No, but we basically when we opened our restaurant complex back in the late 90s. We wanted to have a range of wines that we produced at Esporão, so we do a late harvest. So we'd have our own late harvest. We thought we should have our own method champenois, So we started doing it as a bit of fun, just for serving in the restaurant. It became popular. Then we started making a bit more to provide the local market, and now, funnily enough, it's going everywhere. So, but it's obviously not something that's it's not our core business.
I'm excited because I'm about to try them.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. But I mean, it's not Cristal or anything like that.
Another question just come in. What's the best way to expose Portuguese wines and traditions to Americans with New World palates? So, I guess it's essentially meaning, people who've been raised on kind of big or wines, oakier wines, or strong wines with stronger fruit profiles to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, Esporão, Alentejo wines particularly, there are regions in Portugal where they would have a lot of trouble. Bairrada being one with Barga, which is very tight and very acidic and very tannic, and it's like Barolo in Italy. Something that's very local, regional, goes well with the food. The Dow wines are very acid, minerally tight. Things like the red wines from the Douro and the whites, and the same thing. I mean, between the Douro and the Alentejo, I mean, the Alentejo wines are perhaps a bit more approachable. But if you like, full-bodied wines with ripe tannins and good alcohol levels, and which is, tend to, perhaps they're not quite as rich as Cabernet from the Napa and that kind of thing. But I mean, in the tastings that we've done over here in the last few years, people they get one over very quickly. I mean,
with food, it's, I guess, in other ways. When you got them with food, I think that to me is a way to get it.
Yeah.
So I think something you've been kind of hitting on with all those answers is it's on the table, it's with a dish, which I think is a way, in a lot of ways, is kind of the secret sauce of getting anybody with a New World palate or exposure to New World wines primarily into wines from almost any other region. You think like Riesling with salted pork or something. Why don't you have that? There's like no going back. I've got another question.
Working with Jane.
Yeah.
Is he a winemaker or? No, he's a grape variety. No, Jane is a
working with Jane. That's the.
You didn't spell it right.
What's her name? I thought you were married.
The N's N-E. It's a grape variety from the Dow. I don't know that much about it, to be honest, and I think it works well in the Dow as a blender. I've never seen a varietal Jane, so I can't really say. I mean, I think it's good that Portugal has these particular regions where the wines come out and they're very typical. They go with the food, and there's a certain amount that you can pull out, like Touriga does well in the Douro, and because it's more famous, I guess we plant it in the Alentejo to
see what happens.
See what happens. We could start doing that with all the different varieties, and then there'll be, I think there's a danger that there could be too much of a kind of mismatch, and there's no difference between the Douro and the Dow and the Alentejo if we start using all the same varieties in the same areas. So I think Jane is important to the Dow, and up to a point, I think probably it's a good thing that we don't have all of them at Esporão, although we just as an experiment, it'd be fun to try.
So stay tuned. I've got a question. So we talked about you've got a couple bridal bottlings.
Yep.
You also do something called Duas Castas, or you just blend two. Yes. Anything coming out 2012 that's good for Duas Castas? And they change. These blends change.
Yeah, we haven't. That's a little bit early to say. I mean, we have a. I was trying to think now. It's. I mean, I know we had some really good. All the whites are looking good. It's. I mean, I left. We were still tasting the ferments. They hadn't all finished, So some had gone through, and some were sort of finishing off. I think we had some really good Arinto, and we haven't used that, I don't think, in the Duas Castas concept before. We've used Viosinhos and Semillons and Verdelhos and bits and pieces. I think Arinto would definitely be one, and I'm not exactly sure what the other one will be. We might use Viognier. We've got some Viognier this year. That's looking interesting. Again, stuff that we planted 3 or 4 years ago and just starting to come on stream. And a lot of those new vineyards, if we get a hot spell, it's hard to get the fruit quality right. You've got to leave them for a few more years, I hope, for a cool year. And this year I think we might do a Viognier Arinto, something like that.
Hey, sorry, you mentioned Semillon a few times.
Yeah.
In our broadcast here. Do you think we're ever going to see a Portuguese Semillon? Or do you think that could take off? in the U.S.?
I don't think. Well, I think it could. I really like the variety, but it's not typically it's not a well received. It's not a well received variety at all. I don't know whether what the consumer interest would be in a Semillon over here. I mean, in Australia, it's been around.
It's not an easy sell.
No, it's been around for 100 years or more. It's Hunter Valley Semillons, are very peculiar, very special wines. The Barossa used to make very big Semillons, and now they just make a sort of more of a commercial style Semillon. So, I mean, the wine writers, the opinion makers in Australia, they like to talk up Semillon, but the consumers haven't really sort of embraced. It's not one of those varieties that jumps out of the glass and you immediately appealing like the Vidalia,
Right.
and it's not doesn't have the body of a Chardonnay. So kind of somewhere in the middle there. I mean, I like it because I like it for those reasons, that it's a bit more restrained, and you can use barrels, or you can make it with unoaked. And we like it. We've used it in douche casters, and we use it as a barrel fermented wine in one of our top wines.
So, still a blender.
Yeah.
And we've got a comment here. There's a comment from the peanut gallery that we have a bromance. So can we hug it out?
What's this?
But we're just gonna hug it out for everybody. Come on, these great wines.
Okay, why not? Dirty deeds don't do it.
Yeah, long flights for David. Any other questions from?
Sure, I get paid a bit.
About that was a freebie. That was a freebie. Any other questions out there? I think that's it. So I think we're just running a little bit over. Oh, sounds like we might have one more. We'll get at least one last question in here. I think they're trying to translate it.
No, it's a silly one.
No, it's okay.
Somebody spotted the bed back there.
Yeah, we're actually in David's hotel room. Don't read too much into that. Well, I think we can wrap it up. David, thank you very much. I hope that everybody enjoyed this. I've been working with Esporão for almost 2 years now, so I've been fortunate enough to meet everybody involved in most of the winemaking and the selling of the wine. It's really a great company, and I've been fortunate enough to tour the properties. It's exciting wines for me. I don't talk about them on One Wine Dude because obviously there would be a bit of a conflict of interest having worked with you guys, but I wish I could, because they're generally wines that I get excited about. So hopefully you've all enjoyed that and shared the same excitement I've got for. David and I think, are going to go drink these wines now and finish these bottles at dinner. Well, thank you again, David.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.